The blood on Sarah Mitchell's hands had long since dried, but she could still feel it burning into her palms as she scrubbed the wooden floors of the trading post until her knuckles bled. It was not her own blood this time, but the blood of a deer that her master, Josiah Crawford, had butchered in the middle of the store, laughing as he tracked entrails across the planks she had spent all morning cleaning. He had done it on purpose, of course, just as he did everything with deliberate cruelty, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction when she flinched at the mess spreading across her work. Montana City sprawled across the valley in the summer of 1878, a collection of rough buildings and dusty streets where the railroad had brought both fortune and misfortune in equal measure. Sarah had arrived here 3 years ago at the age of 18, sold into indentured servitude by a father who valued whiskey more than his own daughter. The contract bound her to Josiah Crawford for 7 years of labor to pay off debts she had never incurred, and every day of those 3 years had been a lesson in human cruelty. Josiah kept 3 hounds in the back of his trading post, mangy creatures that snapped and fought over scraps. Yet those dogs lived better than Sarah ever did. They had shelter from the rain, blankets to sleep on, and bowls of food set out regularly. Sarah slept on the floor of the storage room among the crates and barrels, her only covering a thin piece of canvas that did nothing against the Montana cold. She ate whatever Josiah deemed unfit for sale, moldy bread and rancid meat, and only after the dogs had been fed. More than once, she had watched him toss a fresh cut of beef to his hounds while she went another day with an empty stomach. The bruises on her arms told their own story, purple and yellow marks that she kept hidden beneath long sleeves even in the summer heat. Josiah had a temper that ignited like dry kindling, and his fists were quick to remind her of her place. He never struck her face, too smart for that, knowing that visible injuries might draw unwanted questions from the few townspeople who bothered to notice her existence at all. But her ribs ached constantly, and she had learned to move slowly in the mornings, letting her body adjust to the pain before attempting the day's endless tasks. She was scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain when the bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. Sarah did not look up immediately, knowing that Josiah would strike her if she appeared too eager or too slow, the exact balance a mystery that changed with his moods. She heard the heavy footsteps of a man, the jingle of spurs, and then a voice that seemed to carry warmth like summer sunshine. "Afternoon. I am looking for supplies for a cattle drive. Need enough hardtack, coffee, and dried beans to feed 20 men for 3 weeks. Sarah risked a glance upward and found herself staring at the most striking man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty shirt, and a face weathered by sun and wind into something ruggedly handsome. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, like the sky over the mountains, and they held a kindness that seemed out of place in the harsh world Sarah had come to know. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed a trim, and nodded politely to Josiah, who had emerged from the back room at the sound of a potential sale. "Frank Easton," the man introduced himself, extending a hand to Josiah. "I run the Double E Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Just brought in a new herd and will be moving them to summer pasture come Monday." Josiah shook his hand with the oily smile he reserved for customers with money. "Josiah Crawford, proprietor of this establishment. I can certainly provide what you need, Mr. Easton. Let me tally up the costs." While the 2 men discussed quantities and prices, Sarah remained on her hands and knees, continuing to scrub at the floor. She could feel Frank Easton's eyes on her several times, though she did not dare look up again. There was something different about the way he looked at her, not with the cruel assessment of Josiah or the dismissive glances of most men, but with something that felt almost like concern. "What about you, miss?" Frank's voice startled her, gentle but direct. "You look like you could use some water on a hot day like this." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but Josiah cut her off with a harsh laugh. "That one does not need anything, Mr. Easton. She is just my servant, working off a debt. Do not trouble yourself about her." "I was not troubling myself," Frank replied, and Sarah detected a subtle shift in his tone, a coolness that had not been there before. "I was being polite to a lady who appears to be working hard." Josiah's smile tightened. "She is no lady, just an indentured girl. Now, about those supplies." Sarah kept her head down, but she felt a small spark of something she had not experienced in years, something that felt dangerously like hope. As the men continued their transaction, she worked her way toward the corner of the room, trying to make herself invisible. She had learned that invisibility was the safest state of being in Josiah's presence. The conversation concluded, and Sarah heard the sound of coins changing hands. "I will send my men to collect the supplies tomorrow morning," Frank said, "but I will be in town myself later in the week. I have other business to attend to." "Always happy to serve you, Mr. Easton," Josiah replied with false cheer. Sarah heard footsteps approaching and tensed, expecting Josiah's hand on her shoulder or worse, but instead she heard Frank Easton's voice directly above her. "Miss, you dropped this." She looked up in confusion, knowing she had not dropped anything, and found Frank crouching beside her, his large frame somehow non-threatening despite his size. In his hand was a folded piece of paper that he had clearly produced himself. His blue eyes met hers, and she saw a message in them that she could not quite decipher. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, taking the paper with trembling fingers. Frank stood and nodded to Josiah. "Good day to you, Mr. Crawford." Then he settled his hat back on his head and walked out of the trading post, the door swinging shut behind him with a definitive sound. Josiah immediately rounded on Sarah. "Get back to work. And what did he give you? Hand it over." Sarah's fingers closed protectively around the paper, but she knew resistance was futile. Josiah snatched it from her hand, unfolded it, and then crumpled it with a sneer. "Nothing. Just a blank piece of paper. That fool Cowboy probably cannot even write." He threw the wadded paper at her face. "Now finish this floor before supper, or you will go without again." After Josiah retreated to his back office, Sarah retrieved the crumpled paper and carefully smoothed it out. At first glance it did appear blank, but when she held it up to the afternoon light streaming through the window, she could see faint pencil marks, barely visible. The message was simple and written in a firm, careful hand. "I will help you. Be ready Wednesday evening. F.E." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Wednesday was 4 days away. 4 days that suddenly seemed both impossibly long and frighteningly short. Help could mean many things, and most of them ended badly for people in her position. Runaway servants were hunted down and punished severely, their contracts extended as penalty. But as she touched the bruises on her arms and felt the constant ache in her empty stomach, Sarah realized that she had nothing left to lose. Whatever Frank Easton was offering, it had to be better than this slow death in Josiah Crawford's trading post. The next 4 days passed with agonizing slowness. Josiah seemed more volatile than usual, perhaps sensing some shift in the air that he could not quite identify. He found fault with everything Sarah did, striking her twice for imagined offenses and withholding her meager meals for an entire day. On Tuesday evening, he came to the storage room where she slept and stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her in the dim lamplight. Sarah had curled into the smallest ball possible, pretending to be asleep, her heart racing with fear that he intended something worse than his usual cruelties. But eventually, he had left, slamming the door so hard that dust rained down from the ceiling beams. Wednesday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that promised another scorching summer day. Sarah performed her morning duties in a haze of nervous anticipation, her mind racing through possibilities. What if Frank Easton had changed his mind? What if it was all a cruel joke? What if Josiah discovered the plan and punished her before she could escape? Every creak of the floorboards, every customer who entered the store, made her jump with anxiety. As evening approached, Josiah left the store to attend a card game at the saloon, as he did most Wednesday nights. This was part of his routine, a pattern Sarah had long since memorized. He usually stayed out until well past midnight, returning drunk and mean, looking for reasons to lash out. Before leaving, he locked the front door from the outside and secured the back door with a heavy bolt that Sarah could not move from inside. She was imprisoned as thoroughly as if she were in a jail cell. Sarah stood in the growing darkness, wondering how Frank Easton could possibly help her if she could not even get out of the building. Then she heard a soft tapping at the back window, the small one set high in the wall of the storage room. Her pulse quickened as she dragged a crate beneath it and climbed up to peer outside. Frank Easton's face appeared in the gathering dusk, and despite the seriousness of the situation, he offered her a reassuring smile. "Can you open this window, Miss Mitchell?" She nodded and worked at the latch, which was stiff from disuse. The window had not been opened in years, and her weak arms struggled with it. Frank seemed to understand immediately. "Step back," he said softly. Sarah climbed down just as Frank produced a small pry bar and carefully worked it into the window frame. The old wood splintered with a crack that sounded deafening in the quiet evening. Frank quickly removed enough of the frame to swing the window inward, then reached his arms through the opening. "Can you reach me?" he asked. "I can pull you through." Sarah looked at the narrow opening with doubt, but Frank's calm confidence steadied her. She climbed back onto the crate and reached upward. His hands closed around her wrists, strong but gentle, and he lifted her with surprising ease. The window frame scraped against her shoulders and hips, but within moments she was through, tumbling out into Frank's arms. He steadied her on her feet, his hands remaining on her shoulders for just a moment. "Are you hurt?" "No, sir," she whispered, hardly believing she was actually outside, actually free. "Just Frank," he corrected gently. "And we need to move quickly. I have a horse waiting." He took her hand, his palm rough and warm, and led her away from the trading post. In the shadows behind the building, a beautiful bay mare stood waiting, her reins loosely tied to a post. Frank untied the horse and then, with careful courtesy, lifted Sarah into the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Hold on," he said softly, his arms coming around her to take the reins. Sarah had never been this close to a man who did not mean her harm, and the feeling was both strange and comforting. Frank urged the horse into a quick walk, keeping to the alleys and back ways until they reached the edge of town. Only then did he allow the mare to break into a steady lope, carrying them away from Montana City and into the vast darkness of the Montana prairie. They rode for what felt like hours, though Sarah suspected it was less. She had no concept of time anymore, her entire world reduced to the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the solid warmth of Frank behind her. He did not speak during the ride, focused on navigating by starlight, but his presence was reassuring in a way she could not quite explain. Finally, lights appeared in the distance, warm and welcoming. As they drew closer, Sarah could make out a large ranch house, a barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. The Double E Ranch was clearly a prosperous operation, well-maintained and substantial. Frank guided the mare directly to the main house, where a woman appeared on the porch, lamplight spilling out behind her. "You found her then," the woman said as Frank dismounted and then helped Sarah down. Her voice was kind but practical, the voice of someone accustomed to taking charge. "Yes, Mrs. Henderson. This is Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, this is Agnes Henderson, my housekeeper and the person who really runs this ranch." Agnes Henderson was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Sarah over with a clinical assessment that held no judgment, only concern. "Poor lamb is half-starved. Come inside, child. Let us get some food in you and see about those bruises." Sarah found herself ushered into the ranch house, which was warm and clean and filled with comfortable furniture. The contrast to Josiah's trading post was so stark that she felt dizzy. Agnes sat her down at a large kitchen table and immediately began preparing food, while Frank excused himself to tend to his horse. "Now then," Agnes said, setting a glass of milk and a plate of bread and butter before Sarah. "Eat slowly, mind you. If you have not been eating regular, you will make yourself sick if you rush it." She sat down across from Sarah and folded her hands. "Mr. Easton told me about your situation. That man Crawford is known around these parts as a cruel bastard, if you will pardon my language. Frank has been trying to figure out how to help you since he first saw you last week." "But why?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. She could not remember the last time anyone had asked her opinion or encouraged her to speak. "He does not know me. I am just a servant." Agnes's expression softened. "You are a human being, child, and that is enough for Frank Easton. He cannot abide seeing people mistreated, especially women. Lost his own mother when he was young, saw his father turn mean afterward. Frank swore he would never be that kind of man, and he has kept that promise." She paused. "Now, you are probably wondering what happens next." Sarah nodded, taking a small bite of the bread. It was fresh and soft, better than anything she had tasted in 3 years. "Frank has a lawyer friend in Helena, a good man who specializes in cases like yours. He's going to challenge your indenturement contract. Apparently, if your father sold you to pay his own debts, there are legal grounds to void the whole agreement. It will take some time, but in the meantime, you will stay here at the ranch." Agnes held up a hand before Sarah could protest. "You will have your own room in the house, proper meals, and if you want to work to earn your keep, we can always use help with the household tasks. But you will be paid a fair wage, and you will be treated with respect. Those are Frank's terms, and he does not negotiate on such matters." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks before she could stop them. 3 years of pain and fear and hopelessness finally finding release. Agnes moved around the table and pulled Sarah into a motherly embrace, letting her cry until the storm passed. "There now," Agnes said gently, producing a handkerchief. "You are safe here. Frank Easton gave his word, and that is as good as gold in this territory. Now, let us get you cleaned up and into a proper bed. Tomorrow will be soon enough to worry about everything else." That night, Sarah slept in a real bed for the first time in years, with clean sheets and a soft pillow and a quilt that smelled of lavender. She woke several times, disoriented and afraid, convinced she was back in the storage room and that everything had been a dream. But each time, she felt the comfort of the bed and heard the quiet sounds of the ranch house at night. And slowly, she began to believe that perhaps her nightmare had finally ended. Morning came with sunlight streaming through lace curtains, another luxury Sarah had forgotten existed. She dressed in the simple but clean dress that Agnes had left folded on a chair and ventured out of her room cautiously. The smell of coffee and bacon guided her to the kitchen, where she found Agnes already at work and Frank sitting at the table, reading a newspaper. He stood immediately when she entered, a gesture of courtesy that startled her. "Good morning, Sarah. I hope you slept well." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," she replied automatically. "Just Frank," he corrected again, his smile gentle. "We do not stand on ceremony here. Please sit down. Agnes has made enough breakfast to feed the whole crew, as usual." The meal was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her servitude. Frank and Agnes included her in the conversation, asking her opinions on small matters and treating her input as valuable. Frank explained that he needed to ride into town later that morning to send a telegram to his lawyer friend, but he assured Sarah that she should not worry. "Crawford will likely figure out where you have gone, but he cannot do anything about it," Frank said firmly. "This is my property, and I have every right to employ whoever I choose. If he tries to make trouble, I will deal with it." "But my contract," Sarah began, her voice tight with anxiety, "is almost certainly not legal," Frank replied. "But even if it were, I have enough resources to buy out your remaining years of service. One way or another, Sarah, you will never go back to that man. You have my word on that." His blue eyes held such certainty that Sarah felt some of her fear begin to ebb. She had spent so long believing she was trapped, believing there was no way out, that freedom seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Yet here she was, eating a proper breakfast in a warm kitchen, treated with more kindness in 12 hours than she had experienced in 3 years. Over the following days, Sarah began to find her place in the rhythm of the ranch. Agnes put her to work with light household tasks, always making sure she ate regular meals and rested when she grew tired. Frank was often out working with his men, but he made a point of checking in with Sarah each evening, asking about her day and ensuring she was comfortable. His attention was never intrusive or demanding, simply the quiet concern of a man who genuinely cared about the well-being of those in his household. Sarah found herself watching Frank more than she probably should. She noticed the way he treated his ranch hands with respect, paying them fair wages and never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. She saw how he cared for his animals, ensuring the horses were properly fed and the cattle had good pasture. She observed his patience when things went wrong, his calm problem-solving when faced with challenges. Frank Easton was everything Josiah Crawford was not, and Sarah felt something stirring in her heart that she barely recognized. It had been so long since she had felt anything but fear and pain that these new emotions were almost overwhelming. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when Frank would sit on the porch after supper, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching the sunset. Agnes had started encouraging Sarah to join him, insisting that she deserved some leisure time after her work was done. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival at the ranch, Sarah finally gathered the courage to accept Agnes's suggestion. She walked out onto the porch where Frank sat in a rocking chair, his long legs stretched out and his hat pushed back on his head. "May I join you?" she asked softly. Frank looked up with evident pleasure. "Of course. I would enjoy the company." Sarah sat in the other rocking chair, folding her hands in her lap. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The Montana landscape stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, and Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of tension that had been there for so long she had forgotten it existed. "I want to thank you," she said finally, "for everything you have done for me. I do not understand why, but I am grateful beyond words." Frank turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You do not need to thank me, Sarah. What I did was simply what any decent person would do." "But most people did not," she pointed out. Many people saw how he treated me over the years. No one else tried to help. Frank was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening. I know, and that shames me even though I did not know about it until I walked into that trading post. The world can be a harsh place, especially for women alone. My mother died when I was 15, and in the months before her death, my father became a different man. He started drinking, started being cruel. I saw how much she suffered, and I was too young to know how to help her. After she passed, I promised myself that if I ever had the means and the opportunity, I would help others in similar situations. When I saw you on your hands and knees in that store, saw the bruises on your arms and the look in your eyes, I knew I had to do something. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the ones she had cried that first night. These were tears of gratitude and something else, something warmer. You are a good man, Frank Easton. He shook his head. I am just a man trying to do right, but I appreciate your saying so. He paused, then added carefully, I received a telegram from my lawyer friend today. He has reviewed the details of your situation and believes he can have your contract nullified within a month. Your father had no legal right to indenture you for his debts, and Crawford knew it. He has been exploiting you illegally all this time. Relief washed over Sarah so powerfully that she felt lightheaded. Truly, I will be free, truly, Frank confirmed. And Crawford will be lucky if he does not face charges himself for his treatment of you. I documented your injuries when you arrived, and Agnes has been a witness to your condition. The law may be slow and imperfect, but in this case, it is on your side. What will I do then? Sarah asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Freedom was wonderful, but it also meant uncertainty. She had no family, no money, no prospects beyond the generosity of the man sitting beside her. Frank leaned forward in his chair, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. That is entirely up to you, Sarah. You are welcome to stay here at the ranch for as long as you like. Agnes could certainly use the help, and you have proven yourself to be a hard worker. Or, if you prefer, I can help you get established somewhere else, perhaps in a larger city where there are more opportunities for women. I have some connections that might be useful. I would like to stay, Sarah said immediately, then flushed at her own eagerness. If that would be acceptable, I find that I enjoy it here. Frank's smile was warm and genuine. I would be very glad if you stayed. This ranch is starting to feel more like a home with you here. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simple phrasing suggested. Sarah felt her heart begin to beat faster, a flutter of possibility that was both exciting and terrifying. She had been through so much, endured such cruelty, that the idea of opening herself to caring for someone, to perhaps being cared for in return, seemed almost impossible. Yet looking at Frank's kind face, seeing the genuine warmth in his eyes, she felt that perhaps healing was possible after all. As summer deepened into August, Sarah found herself settling more fully into life at the Double E Ranch. Her body slowly recovered from years of mistreatment, filling out with regular meals and proper rest. The bruises faded, the constant ache in her ribs disappeared, and she began to feel truly healthy for the first time since her father had sold her away. Agnes taught her to cook properly, to manage a household, and to take pride in her work without fear of punishment. The ranch hands treated her with respect, tipping their hats when they passed her and thanking her when she brought water out to the fields on hot days. But it was Frank's presence that made the greatest difference in Sarah's healing. He never rushed her, never demanded anything from her, simply offered his steady, reliable kindness day after day. He began teaching her to ride properly, leading her around the corral on a gentle mare until she gained confidence. They took to riding out together in the evenings, exploring the ranch lands and the beautiful country beyond. Frank would point out landmarks, tell her stories about the area's history, and listen with genuine interest when she tentatively began to share her own thoughts and dreams. One evening in late August, as they sat by a small creek that ran through the northern part of the ranch property, Frank asked her about her life before the indenturement. Sarah found herself talking more freely than she ever had, describing her childhood in Iowa, her mother's death when she was young, her father's slow descent into drink and gambling. Frank listened without judgment, his steady presence making it safe for her to finally voice the pain she had carried for so long. "I used to dream about escaping," she admitted, trailing her fingers in the cool water, "but I could never figure out how. The contract seemed unbreakable, and I had nowhere to go even if I could get away. I started to believe that was just my life, that I deserved it somehow." "You never deserved it," Frank said firmly. "No one deserves to be treated the way Crawford treated you. You were a victim of circumstances beyond your control and the cruelty of men who should have protected you." Sarah looked at him, this man who had changed her entire life with a simple act of kindness. "Why did you really help me, Frank? And please, tell me the truth." Frank met her gaze, and she saw something shift in his expression, something vulnerable and honest. "The truth is that from the moment I saw you in that store, I could not stop thinking about you. It was not just about righting a wrong, though that was certainly part of it. There was something about you, Sarah, even in that horrible situation. A strength in your eyes, a resilience that had not been broken despite everything. I wanted to know you, to help you become whoever you were meant to be before life became so cruel. And as I have gotten to know you these past months, I have found myself caring for you more than I probably should." Sarah's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Frank reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. "I mean that I have developed feelings for you, Sarah. Deep feelings. I know the timing may seem wrong, and the last thing I want is to make you uncomfortable in the one place you feel safe. But I believe in being honest about important things, and this feels very important to me." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from hard work, hers still healing but growing stronger every day. She realized that the flutter in her heart that she felt whenever Frank was near, the way she looked forward to seeing him each day, the comfort she found in his presence, all of it added up to something she had never expected to feel. She was falling in love with Frank Easton, perhaps had been falling in love with him since the moment he handed her that note in the trading post. "I have feelings for you too," she whispered, hardly believing she was brave enough to say the words aloud. "I did not think I could ever trust a man again after everything that happened, but you have shown me that not all men are like Josiah Crawford or my father. You have been nothing but kind and respectful and good. I care for you, Frank, very much." Frank's expression transformed, joy and relief mingling in his smile. "Sarah Mitchell, would you allow me to court you properly? I know you have been through a difficult time, and I do not want to rush you into anything. But I would very much like to spend time with you with the intention of building something lasting, if you are willing." "I am willing," Sarah replied, her own smile feeling strange and wonderful on her face. It had been so long since she had smiled with genuine happiness that she had almost forgotten how. Frank lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture old-fashioned and sweet. Then, "I am the luckiest man in Montana." The news that Frank Easton was courting his former house guest spread through Montana City within days, carried by ranch hands and traveling merchants who had business at the Double E. The reaction was mixed. Most people, knowing Frank's character and having witnessed or heard about Crawford's cruelty, approved of the match. But there were some, particularly those who had business dealings with Crawford or who held strict views about propriety, who whispered that it was inappropriate for a ranch owner to court a former indentured servant. Frank ignored the gossip entirely, and he encouraged Sarah to do the same. He courted her openly and honestly, bringing her flowers from the meadow, taking her to church socials in town, treating her like the lady she had never been allowed to be. Sarah blossomed under his attention, her confidence growing day by day. She held her head high when they walked through town together, refusing to be shamed by whispers and stares. Josiah Crawford, for his part, made several attempts to cause trouble. He tried to have Frank arrested for theft, claiming Sarah was his property. The sheriff, a fair man named Tom Willis, laughed him out of the office and warned him against making false accusations. Crawford then tried to approach Sarah directly one day when she was in town with Agnes, but Frank's ranch hands, who had been instructed to keep an eye out for trouble, intervened before Crawford could get within 10 feet of her. Finally, when Frank's lawyer successfully nullified Sarah's contract and threatened to press charges against Crawford for illegal indenturement and abuse, Crawford gave up and slunk away, his reputation in Montana City permanently tarnished. In early October, with Sarah's contract officially dissolved and her freedom legally secured, Frank asked her to take a ride with him. They rode out to a high point on the ranch where the view stretched for miles in every direction, the fall colors painting the landscape in gold and red. Frank helped Sarah dismount and then took both her hands in his. "Sarah, these past few months have been the happiest of my life," he began, his blue eyes intense and sincere. "You have brought light and joy into this ranch in ways I never expected. You are strong and brave and kind, and I find myself more in love with you every single day. I know we have not been courting for very long by traditional standards, but I also know my own heart, and it is entirely yours." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "Sarah Mitchell, would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife? I promise to spend every day of my life treating you with the love and respect you deserve, making up for all the days you were treated so poorly. I want to build a life with you, a family with you, and grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Sarah's vision blurred with tears, but these were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Frank, I will marry you. I love you so much." Frank opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful gold band with a small diamond, and he slipped it onto her finger with trembling hands. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time, gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious beyond measure. Sarah kissed him back, pouring all her gratitude and love and hope for the future into that moment. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Montana City. Agnes served as Sarah's matron of honor, and Frank's foreman stood up as his best man. Despite the short notice, the church was filled with well-wishers, ranch hands, and townspeople who had come to respect both Frank and Sarah. Even the reverend seemed genuinely moved by the ceremony, speaking eloquently about second chances and the power of kindness to transform lives. Sarah wore a beautiful white dress that Agnes had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Frank wore his best suit and could not stop smiling throughout the entire ceremony. When the reverend pronounced them man and wife, Frank kissed her with such tender passion that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food enough for everyone. Frank had hired a small band from a neighboring town, and there was dancing late into the evening. Sarah found herself swept around the dance floor by her new husband, laughing with pure happiness, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about them both. As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, Frank carried Sarah across the threshold of the ranch house that was now legally her home. He set her down gently in the bedroom they would now share, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, taking in the magnitude of what had happened. "Are you happy?" Frank asked softly, cupping her face in his hands. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Sarah replied honestly. "6 months ago I was sleeping on a storage room floor, hungry and beaten and hopeless. Tonight I am your wife, standing in our home surrounded by love. It feels like a miracle." "You are the miracle," Frank said. "You survived things that would have broken most people, and you came out of it with your heart still capable of love and trust. I am in awe of you, Sarah Easton." Hearing her new name spoken aloud sent a thrill through Sarah. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell, the indentured servant, the unwanted daughter. She was Sarah Easton, wife to a good man, mistress of a prosperous ranch, and a woman with a future full of possibility. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Frank taking great care to make sure Sarah felt safe and cherished. He was patient with her inexperience, guiding her gently, and when she tentatively explored the intimacy of marriage, he responded with passion tempered by genuine love. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Sarah's head on Frank's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I will spend the rest of my life making you happy," Frank murmured into her hair. "That is my vow to you, Sarah, every day for the rest of our lives." "And I will love you every day for the rest of mine," Sarah replied. "You gave me back my life, Frank. You treated me like a queen when I had been treated worse than the dogs. I will never forget that, and I will never take it for granted." The first year of their marriage was a season of continued healing and growing love. Sarah took to her role as Frank's wife and the mistress of the Double E Ranch with natural grace. She managed the household with Agnes's guidance, learning the complexities of running a large operation. She learned to work alongside Frank during busy seasons, riding out to help with the cattle when needed, developing a genuine love for ranch life. Frank kept his promise to treat her like a queen, but not in ways that made her feel useless or ornamental. He treated her as an equal partner, seeking her input on ranch decisions, valuing her opinions and supporting her when she wanted to try new things. When Sarah expressed interest in learning to keep the ranch books, Frank taught her with patience. When she wanted to start a vegetable garden to supply the ranch with fresh produce, Frank had his men build her the finest garden plot in the territory. But more than any of that, Frank simply loved her. He loved her in the way he reached for her hand while they sat on the porch in the evenings. He loved her in the way he always kissed her goodbye in the morning and hello in the evening, no matter how busy the day had been. He loved her in the way he listened when she talked, really listened, treating her words as valuable. He loved her in the way he held her at night, making her feel safe and cherished. Sarah found herself falling deeper in love with her husband with each passing day. She loved his strength and his gentleness, his quick mind and his slower smile. She loved the way he treated everyone with respect, from the wealthiest rancher to the youngest ranch hand. She loved his integrity, the way he always did what he said he would do. She loved the quiet moments they shared and the passion that flared between them in private. In the spring of 1879, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Frank one evening after supper, nervousness making her hands shake as she shared the news. Frank's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy that probably could be heard in the next county, lifted her carefully off her feet, and spun her around with such obvious delight that Sarah could not help but laugh. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Sarah, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Frank replied, setting her down gently and immediately becoming solicitous. "Should you be sitting down? Do you need anything? Should we send for the doctor?" Sarah laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "Frank, I am pregnant, not ill. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "But those were not my babies, and you are not just any woman," Frank countered. "You are my wife, and you are precious to me. I will not apologize for wanting to take care of you." Frank's protectiveness only increased as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. He hired additional help for the household so Sarah would not overwork herself. He insisted she rest every afternoon and made sure she ate well. He read every book about pregnancy and childbirth he could find, determined to understand what Sarah was going through. His care was never controlling or stifling, always coming from a place of love and genuine concern. Sarah bloomed during her pregnancy, her happiness visible to everyone who saw her. She and Frank would sit together in the evenings, his hand on her growing belly, feeling their child move and kick. They talked endlessly about the future, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the values they wanted to instill in their children. Frank was determined that their child would grow up in a home filled with love and security, knowing without doubt that they were wanted and cherished. On a cold January morning in 1880, Sarah went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, as first births often are, and Frank paced the floors of the ranch house like a caged animal, listening to Sarah's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Agnes and the doctor they had brought in from Helena tended to Sarah, while Frank simply waited and prayed. Finally, in the early afternoon, Frank heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. The doctor emerged from the bedroom with a tired smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Easton. You have a healthy son, and your wife is doing well." Frank rushed into the bedroom to find Sarah propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Meet your son," she said softly. "Meet Daniel Easton." Frank approached the bed carefully, his eyes fixed on the tiny face visible in the blanket. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, his little mouth working. Frank reached out a tentative finger and Daniel immediately wrapped his impossibly small hand around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Frank breathed, completely awestruck. "Sarah, you did so well. He is absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Sarah said. "Look, they are already blue." Frank sat on the edge of the bed, gathering both Sarah and Daniel into his arms as carefully as if they were made of glass. "Thank you," he whispered into Sarah's hair. "Thank you for this incredible gift, for our son, for being my wife, for everything." Daniel Easton proved to be a healthy, happy baby who brought even more joy into the ranch house. Frank was a devoted father, never too busy to hold his son or help Sarah with the endless tasks that came with caring for an infant. He would walk Daniel around the ranch, telling him about the cattle and the horses and the land, even though Daniel was far too young to understand. On difficult nights when Daniel was fussy, Frank would take him so Sarah could rest, rocking his son and singing old cowboy songs until the baby settled. Sarah watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. This was the life she had never dared dream of during those dark years in Josiah Crawford's trading post. A husband who loved her, a beautiful home, a child who would never know anything but love and security. Sometimes she would wake in the night and have to touch Frank, to feel the warmth of him beside her, just to assure herself that it was all real. As Daniel grew from an infant into a toddler, the Double E Ranch continued to prosper. Frank's fair dealing and hard work earned him respect throughout the territory, and his business expanded. He bought additional land, increased his herds, and built a reputation as one of the most successful ranchers in Montana. But he never let his success change the man he was. He remained humble and kind, generous to his employees, and devoted to his family. Sarah became known throughout the region as a gracious hostess and a smart businesswoman in her own right. The vegetable garden she had started expanded into a profitable operation, supplying fresh produce to restaurants and hotels in Montana City and beyond. She used the money she earned to fund a small school for ranch children in the area, hiring a teacher and ensuring that even the poorest families had access to education. In the summer of 1882, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. Frank's joy was every bit as intense as it had been with Daniel, and his protectiveness kicked into high gear once more. Daniel, now 2 years old and full of energy, was fascinated by the idea of a baby brother or sister, though he did not really understand what it meant. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when Sarah went into labor on a bright October morning, the birth was relatively quick. Frank was relieved when the doctor emerged after only a few hours with the news that they had a daughter. Frank rushed in to find Sarah holding a tiny baby girl with a shock of dark hair and a surprisingly calm demeanor. "Meet Emma," Sarah said, smiling up at her husband. "Emma Grace Easton." Frank gathered his growing family into his arms, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "2 children," he said wonderingly. "We have 2 beautiful children, Sarah." Emma proved to be a content baby, easier than Daniel had been, and she quickly became the darling of the ranch. The Cowboys would make any excuse to stop by the house, hoping for a chance to see the boss's daughter. Daniel, after an initial period of jealousy, became fiercely protective of his little sister, insisting on helping with everything from feeding to diaper changes. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work, family life, and deep contentment. Frank and Sarah's love for each other only deepened with time, weathering the normal challenges that all marriages face, but never wavering in their commitment to each other. They added 2 more children to their family, another son named Benjamin in 1884 and a daughter named Rose in 1887, until the ranch house rang with the sounds of childhood laughter and running feet. Sarah never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to losing everything. She made a point of watching for people in trouble, offering help when she could, and teaching her children the importance of kindness and compassion. When they asked about her past, she told them the truth in age-appropriate ways, wanting them to understand that their comfortable life was not something to take for granted. Frank supported her in this, adding his own lessons about treating all people with respect and dignity. The Easton children grew up understanding that their father was respected not because of his wealth, but because of his character. They saw how he treated his employees fairly, how he honored his word, how he was devoted to their mother. They learned by example what it meant to be good people. One evening in the spring of 1890, Sarah and Frank sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the sun set over the land they loved. Their children were inside with Agnes, who still lived with them and had become a beloved grandmother figure to the young ones. Sarah leaned against Frank's shoulder, feeling the comfortable weight of his arm around her. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked softly. Frank pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I try not to dwell on the what-ifs. I am too grateful for what is." "I was just thinking about that day you walked into Crawford's trading post," Sarah continued. "What if you had chosen a different store? What if you had not noticed me? What if you had decided it was not your problem? But I did notice you, Frank said firmly. And it was impossible not to care once I saw you. Some things are just meant to be, Sarah. I believe that with all my heart. I was meant to find you, you were meant to be saved, and we were meant to build this life together. Sarah turned to look up at her husband, seeing the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, the lines that time and weather had etched into his face, the blue eyes that still looked at her with the same love and devotion they had held from the beginning. I love you, Frank Easton. More than I could ever express with words. And I love you, Sarah Easton. You are still the queen of this ranch and of my heart, and you will be until the day I die and beyond. They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands and watching the stars emerge one by one. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, Agnes calling them to get ready for bed, the normal sounds of a happy home. It was a far cry from the storage room where Sarah had once slept on the floor, hungry and afraid and hopeless. Josiah Crawford had treated her worse than his dogs, beating her and starving her and breaking her spirit day by day. But Frank Easton had treated her like a queen from the moment he met her, recognizing her worth when she could barely see it herself. He had saved her from that nightmare and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. More than that, he had taught her that she deserved to be loved, that her past did not define her future, and that kindness was one of the most powerful forces in the world. As the years continued to pass, the Easton family became a fixture in Montana territory, respected and loved by their community. Daniel grew into a young man much like his father, honest and hardworking with a natural gift for ranching. He took over more and more of the daily operations, allowing Frank to slow down slightly as he aged. Emma became a teacher, fulfilling her mother's dream of expanding educational opportunities in the region. Benjamin studied law and eventually became a judge, known for his fairness and compassion. Rose, the youngest, showed a talent for business and helped expand the family's agricultural ventures. But through it all, Sarah and Frank remained at the heart of the family, their love story the foundation on which everything else was built. They celebrated anniversaries with the same joy they had felt on their wedding day. They supported each other through the inevitable losses that came with time, the deaths of Agnes and other friends, the challenges of aging, the bittersweet experience of watching their children grow up and start families of their own. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Frank surprised Sarah with a gift. He led her out to a spot near the creek where they had shared so many important conversations, and there stood a beautiful gazebo, newly built and painted white, with climbing roses already starting to grow up the sides. I wanted you to have a special place, Frank explained, his eyes suspiciously bright. A place that is just yours, where you can sit and read or think or just enjoy the beauty of this land. A place that reminds you every day that you are cherished and loved. Sarah walked around the gazebo, running her hands over the smooth wood, breathing in the scent of the roses. Then she turned to her husband and pulled him into a kiss that still held all the passion and love of their youth, tempered now by the deep understanding that came from 2 decades of life shared together. "You have given me so much," she said when they finally broke apart. "You gave me my life back, Frank. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and most of all, you gave me love. Real love, the kind I did not even know existed. I could never thank you enough for that." "You thank me every day just by being yourself," Frank replied. "By being the incredible woman you are, by raising our children to be good people, by standing beside me through everything. You are my partner, Sarah, in every sense of the word. I could not have built any of this without you." They stood together in the gazebo, holding each other close, as the Montana sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Around them, the land stretched out in all directions, the land they had worked together to build into something meaningful. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, the next generation of Eastons who would carry on the legacy of kindness and integrity that Frank and Sarah had established. The years turned into decades, and Sarah and Frank grew old together with grace and continued devotion. They faced the new century together, watching the world change around them while their love remained constant. They celebrated births and mourned losses, cheered successes and weathered failures, always facing everything hand in hand. On a peaceful spring morning in 1925, just after their 46th wedding anniversary, Frank passed away in his sleep with Sarah holding his hand. He was 88 years old and had lived a full life, surrounded by the family he loved. Sarah, devastated by the loss but grateful for every moment they had shared, lived for 3 more years, spending her remaining time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the remarkable man who had changed her life so completely. When Sarah passed away in her sleep in 1928 at the age of 70, she was buried beside Frank on a hill overlooking the Double E Ranch, the land they had built together. Their graves were marked by a simple stone that read, "Frank and Sarah Easton." Beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents, they built a legacy of love. Beneath that, at the insistence of their children, was carved a shorter inscription. He treated her like a queen. She loved him like a king. Together they built a kingdom of kindness. The Double E Ranch continued to operate for generations, run by Easton descendants who never forgot the story of how it all began. They told their children about the day Frank Easton walked into a trading post and saw a young woman being treated worse than dogs, and how his simple act of kindness set in motion a love story that would echo through time. They taught those children that one person's compassion could change everything, that love could heal the deepest wounds, and that treating people with dignity and respect was the most important thing anyone could do. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Montana landscape, people said they could still feel the presence of Frank and Sarah on that land, their love so strong that it had become part of the very earth itself. The gazebo Frank had built for their 20th anniversary still stood, maintained carefully by each generation, a testament to a love that had conquered cruelty and built something beautiful in its place. Sarah Mitchell had once been a girl with no hope, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. But Frank Easton had seen her worth when no one else would, had reached out a hand to pull her from darkness into light. He had treated her like a queen when her master had treated her worse than dogs, and in doing so, he had not only saved her life, but had built a legacy that would inspire generations. Their love story became legend in Montana, a reminder that kindness was not weakness, that compassion could change the world, and that true love, when nurtured and protected, could withstand anything life threw at it. The end of Sarah and Frank's mortal lives was not the end of their story. It lived on in their children, in the ranch that bore their name, in the school Sarah had founded, in the countless lives they had touched through their example of how to treat others. They had taken the worst that life could offer and transformed it into something beautiful and lasting. They had proven that love, real love built on respect and kindness and genuine caring, was the most powerful force in the world. And so the story of Frank and Sarah Easton became more than just a love story. It became a testament to the power of one person choosing to do the right thing, to the resilience of the human spirit, and to the transformative nature of love freely given. In a harsh world that often seemed to reward cruelty and selfishness, they had shown that there was another way, a better way, and that way led to happiness beyond measure. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the Double E Ranch well into the 21st century, still telling the story of Frank and Sarah, still teaching their children the values that had been passed down through 5 generations. The original ranch house had been preserved as a family museum, and visitors could still see the bedroom where Sarah had slept that first night of freedom, the kitchen where Agnes had fed her that first real meal, the porch where Frank and Sarah had courted and later grown old together. But more than the physical remnants of their life, what endured was the intangible legacy they had left behind. In a family that valued kindness over profit, compassion over convenience, and love above all else, the spirit of Frank and Sarah lived on. Every time an Easton descendant chose to help someone in need, every time they treated someone with dignity who others overlooked, every time they built their relationships on mutual respect and genuine caring, they honored the legacy of the cowboy who had treated a broken girl like a queen and the woman who had loved him with her whole heart in return. This was the true happily ever after, not just the fairy tale ending of a wedding and children, but the lasting impact of 2 lives lived well, and a love that had been strong enough to build a foundation for generations. Frank and Sarah had taken their pain and their second chances, and had created something that would outlast them by centuries, a legacy of love that proved that even in the darkest moments, hope was possible, healing was achievable, and happiness was within reach for those brave enough to believe in it and fight for it. And if you listened very carefully on those quiet Montana evenings, standing in the gazebo Frank had built for his beloved wife so many years ago, you might almost hear the echo of their laughter, the whisper of their enduring love, and the promise that true love, freely given and faithfully maintained, really could last forever.